Hey, welcome back to the Quill Tee Knit Along. I'm Jana with Purl Together. In this week's video, we're going to talk about doing the yoke tips and suggestions for doing the color work and keeping good tension while you're doing that. The other thing I want to do real quick before we get started with that is to just give a big public thank you to 4 new patrons that have joined us recently. So thank you so much for joining the Purl Together community over on patreon.com. When you become a patron, you're supporting the channel, and I offer a couple of perks for various tiers of support. So you can check that out at patreon.com/Purl Together. So thank you so much to Patricia, Leanne, Laura, and Mandy. I really appreciate your support, and you keep these videos coming each and every week. So let's get started with knitting the yoke. Okay. So once you've finished the number of rows of plain stockinette stitch that the pattern recommends for your size at the bottom of page 4, we're going to move on to the color work chart. So you can see on the pattern how there's different colored outlines on the chart for whatever size you're knitting. So just make sure that you're following the chart for that. Let's talk about chart reading for a moment. Because of my size, I'm using the larger size chart on page 5. So you'll notice how there's numbers on a chart usually. This is just something I printed, a really simple Christmas tree chart offline just to show you from All Free Knitting, just to show you if you need a refresher on how to read a chart. We'll talk about that for a moment. And then I also have another video that goes a lot more in depth about reading a chart, and I'll link that down below in the video description, as well as putting it up there in the where you can click in the upper right hand corner. So you'll notice that these boxes are numbered 1 and 1. So this is row 1 and stitch 1. And so just like we knit, we're knitting from right to left in the same way. So in this chart, for example, we would knit 6 stitches of white, then 1 green, and we'd alternate, and we're moving across the row like this. When you're knitting in the round, you just keep going round and round, and that's excellent. If you're knitting, that's easiest. If you're knitting back and forth, you would knit across this first row, and then you're turning your work usually for the second row on the wrong side, so you would do the opposite. So instead of knitting, you'd purl, etc. But for our purpose in this pattern, we're knitting in the rounds. We're not going to get too much off in the weeds. We're talking about talking about knitting back and forth flat. So what we're doing here is just knitting straight across this way, following what stitch is what color, and then round 2's the same way. We're just keeping track. Now on this particular pattern, it's very simple. We're not going to have a lot of floats to catch. Like here, we would want to carry along the white behind the green. If we were doing this, we'd probably want to, catch that float every 3 to 4 stitches, maybe like right here in the middle. At just scanning this chart, I don't really think we have much of a worry for any of that. So that's why this pattern is fantastic to learn with. But the first thing we're going to want to do is attach our color, our second color. My size begins with just alternating a dark and light, dark and light, dark and light. And I'm sizing up my needle, so I'm smashing this on here because I'm sizing up a little bit, and I'll show you why. What I'm going to do first is just take the light color and just hold it behind. Okay, right away, first I'm going to knit the dark color first for my size, then I'm going to knit the light. Now, you can grab this, you can just drop your main color, drop the main color and pick up the other one and knit it. That's okay, but that's going to become super tedious if you're doing that for every single stitch. So it is nice if you can learn to do it two-handed, whether that's holding this side continental and then, knitting like that. I'm super awkward at continental knitting. I can do it, but I'm, like I said, very awkward at the picking. You can, if you're just alternating. I do this really funky, awkward thing where I'm going to put this little ball of white over on the left because that's easier for me. And you'll notice I didn't tie this or anything. I'm going to just weave that in later. But what I do is I just loop it over, and then I kind of just grab it and, take it, wrap it around my needle. I have found that works for me to keep things pretty loose. What you want to be mindful of when you're knitting color work is the spacing here. You don't want to have your little float, meaning the strand behind, so tight that you're pulling and When you pull this too tight, it pulls the float and then it yanks the stitches together and causes things to pucker. So that's the main thing, is keeping your spacing. So I just go along. I'm not very fast about, using my left hand for color work. I just kind of go along in my little awkward way. I have a specific video about knitting color work that I'll link down below as well. For this beginner color work pattern, it's pretty straightforward. Now you will see that you'll see people that hold both yarns in the same hand like this, and they're able to kind of grab whichever strand they want. Again, I am not good at that. You can, and that would tension it pretty evenly. I've seen people that can one yarn off each finger like that. I am not good at that either. But these are just some ideas. You can do what works best for you, okay? Okay, we've completed the first alternating round of color work. Now, we're just going to knit 2 rounds of the dark and let this hang out and wait. And it's only going to be 2 rows, which is, maybe 1/4 of an inch that it's going to strand up the back and make a vertical line up the back. So not a big deal, but I did want to address that. And you'll notice that stitch is really elongated, but that's just because we haven't woven this end, woven in the tail. And, when we tighten that up appropriately, it looks just fine. So not to worry there. Everything, the tension will even out as we weave in those ends and correct that. So we're just going to knit 2 plain rows and then bring up the white yarn when we need it, being careful not to pucker anything. All right, you can see I have a pretty good start here on the color work on the yoke. The only other thing I want to point out during this week's video is at the top right-hand side of page 5, be sure to double check your colorwork stitch counts. The designer has put them all there after each increase row, so you'll know how many you should have every time you do, a couple of stitches and a make one. So be sure to double check that before you carry on. Like, don't just assume that everything's good, because if it's not, you're going to find out later. And then the only other thing I was going to show you was on the back, you can see how I've got my floats going along, and they're pretty loose. And then you can see at the beginning of the round, sometimes the white strand has gone diagonally up. And so you just want to make sure to keep those not super tight so that you don't have any puckers here at the beginning of the round when when you have a plain round, like on row 12, for example, and then you jump back in using both colors. So I hope that makes sense. As always, be sure to holler if you have any questions. Okay, so you'll want to continue with however many rows you need to do on the chart, depending on the size that you're knitting. I'm doing one of the bigger sizes, and so I have, I think, like 40 some odd rows to do. I'm about halfway through that, and I'm really digging it. I'm going to have to get a bigger cable here in a moment. And I will get a bigger cable. I'm going to put on some of those silicone stitch stoppers, and then I can kind of pull it over my head and try it on. So that's one thing that makes top-down sweaters a lot of fun, is that you can try it on as you go. So I'm also doing this neat gradient that I think I showed you before. I did start on the dark purple side, and it's kind of moving into a, kind of a reddish purple, then kind of, anyway. So that's been a lot of fun. So here's the color I'm working on. Here's the color I'm going to. You can kind of see a bit of a difference there. And then the next couple of, I'm getting my drawer here. The next couple are kind of moving. You can see which way we're going here. So that's been kind of neat to see how that's progressing. And I love a good gradient. So I'm excited about that. In other news, over on the patron side of things, we're kind of having a simultaneous knit along with the witching hour sweater, because it was a sweater I really wanted to knit, and I'm trying to hurry up and knit it before Halloween, because I want to wear it to school. Like, who doesn't want to wear their Halloween stuff to school? So I kind of feel like I'm 8 again, but it's fun. So that's one benefit of being a patron, is that we have these little silly things that I think of, like a flash knit along that's going on kind of in the background, as well as the quill tee. So I'm pleased about how this is going. and I'd love to see your projects. So drop a photo in the Ravelry thread or tag me on Instagram, Facebook, the Facebook group. All the links for all that stuff is down below in the video description. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I can't wait to see your work in progress. Thanks for watching.